Okay, welcome everyone. Last week we started a mini series as part of our fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut on light. And for those who were here last week, we pretty much focused just on light on the first day of creation, which we're going to go back and continue that today. And the light as represented in the menorah in the temple, and the light of the Chanukiah. So that's what we covered last week. We're going to continue this week, and there probably will be at least one and most likely two more classes about light. So we're going to start again back in creation. And I just want to point out that one of the points that we brought up last week, and we will be continuing with this idea throughout, is the paradoxical nature of light as developed and learned through the Torah, and the paradox of light as taught by science. There are actually a number of paradoxes that have to do with light and science. Last week we mentioned probably the main one is the very, very mysterious phenomenon that light is both a particle and a wave. And even according to every scientist, no one really understands exactly how it works, because it's very paradoxical that depending on how light is observed, it will either manifest itself as a wave or a particle. And each one, in a sense, is mutually exclusive of the other one. So then we brought a number of ideas in the Torah that also show the paradox of light, in that it's both spiritual and physical. There is a part of light that is infinite and a part that is finite, and a constant theme of light revealing itself and being hidden. So that's just a quick review of how we started the series. So tonight we are going to be focusing on just one idea, and that is the relationship and contrast and compatibility between light and darkness. That will be our theme tonight, light and darkness. So we go to the first day of creation, and when light is created on the third verse of the Torah, where it says, V'yomer Elokim yihi or, v'yihi or. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And the Torah continues and says, V'yar Elokim et ha'or ki tov. God saw the light that it was good. V'yavdel Elokim bein ha'or u'bein ha'choshech. And God separated between the light and the darkness. Vayikra Elokim la'or yom. And God called the light day. Uv'lechoshech kara laila. And the darkness he called night. Vayhi erev vayhi boker yom echad. It was evening, it was day one, or the day of the one, or day of oneness. So everything in the Torah is like shorthand. There is so much between the lines, between each letter. There's just so much there. But what we can get from this, God says the light is good, and he separated between the light and the darkness. Well, it doesn't mention that God created darkness. There's an assumption here. Now, darkness already appears in the second verse. The earth was chaotic and void. V'choshech al pnei hatahom, and there was darkness on the face of the abyss. V'ruach Elokim merachefet al pnei hamayim, and the Spirit of God moved across the waters. So here, there's already Hosha before there's light. Now, as we're going to see, this is extremely significant. And it doesn't say that God created darkness. It also doesn't say that God created water. It was there. So the question that is really asked here is, what is the nature of darkness? Is darkness an absence of light, or is darkness a creation in of its own right? Meaning it's not just the absence of light, but there is a whole reality to Choshech in of itself. So before we answer that, I'm going to bring you a Torah from Rav Ginzburg, a really very deep Torah. And once we learn this, then we're going to learn the follow-up of it, the ramifications of it. So Rav Ginzburg points out that the 12th word of the Torah is Choshech. Choshech is the 12th word of the Torah. Light, or, is the 25th word of the Torah. Now, for those who were here last week, we learned the significance that the 25th word of the Torah is a deep allusion to the 25th of Kislev and the Festival of Lights of Hanukkah, which is all about light. But what is the significance that Choshech is the 12th word and light is the 25th word? This is all a Torah from Rav Ginzburg. And he says like this, that 25 is Chaf Hey. If you remember, one of the explanations of Hanukkah is Chanu Chaf Hey. They rested Chanu Chaf Hey on the 25th of Kislev. So the Chaf Hey is also a word, ko. And this is the way that the prophets would talk in God's name. They would say, Ko Hamar Hashem. Thus, Ko, thus God has spoken. Moshe Rabbeinu also gave over different teachings with the word Ko. But we're told that the difference between Moshe and all the other prophets is only Moshe also prophesied with the word Zeh. Zeh hadavar asher tziva Hashem. This, exactly this is what God has commanded. Ko, the letter Chaf, if you put it in front of words, sometimes means like or approximately. Ke, it's kind of like something. So when the prophets would say Ko Hamar Hashem, they were speaking in God's name, but because the prophecy came to them in what's called aspaklaria lo me'ira, a translucent pain. In other words, as if you look out of a frosted window and you see what's on the outside, but it's somewhat blurred because the window itself is frosted. Or if you look out of a pure pane of glass, transparent, then you see exactly what's on the other side. So they say Moshe, he was on the level of Zeh Hadavar. Exactly this is what God said. And the other prophets were, because their prophecy came to them through a dream or through a vision or through a riddle or a parable. So that was the difference between Moshe and the other ones. So Rav Ginzburg points out that the 25th word of the Torah is ko. And the 12th is the word zeh. The word zeh equals 12. So he was saying that this is hinting, and we're going to see the ramifications of this in a second, that there is a reality to Choshech, to darkness that is deeper and higher than light. That's a very, very important statement, because usually we think of light as everything good, and Hosha represents everything bad. But we're going to go deeper and try to explain that that's not necessarily true. There is a truth to it, as we'll see, but it's not the whole truth. So to go back to our question, is darkness just an absence of light? Or is it a creation in of itself? So already we see that darkness precedes light. And every morning in our morning prayers, Shachrit, we say about God, Yotzer Or Uvorei Choshech. He forms light and he creates darkness. So here we see that darkness was created. It isn't just an absence of light. And in Kabbalah, if we look at the names of the 4 Kabbalistic worlds, so the world of Bria is above the world of Yetzirah. And it says Yotzer Or, that's Olam HaYetzirah. Olam HaBria is a higher level, and it says Uvorei Choshech. And God created light, not just formed it, but created it. So here already we see that there is a reality to Choshech that is not just an absence of light. Now, the paradox of Choshech is that it has both a positive and a negative connotation. In of itself, it's in a sense it's neutral, but in a sense we view Choshech depending on the context, and we associate certain ideas with it. And we will be exploring that more as we go further. So now we're going to try to explain we'll call it a ladder of 4 rungs to understand the relationship between Choshech and Or, and light. So in a sense, the highest one is darkness, because darkness is represented by what's called the Ein Sof. Ein Sof means infinite. That's how we translate it. Literally means without end in Hebrew. Ein Sof, there is no end. So we translate it as infinite. But if you just take the first word, Ein means nothingness. So the Ein Sof, in a sense, is an infinite state of nothingness. From this nothingness comes everything else. And this is represented by the womb. In other words, within the womb, it's dark. Or, for example, let's say if we go to the mikvah and we immerse in the mikvah and our eyes are closed. So we're in a state of total darkness. But the whole idea of immersing in a mikvah is the idea of rebirth, of renewal, of new life. So we begin with, and there's this infinite darkness, but we have to break a certain stereotype we have that dark means without light. Because here we're talking about a darkness that shines. And the Zohar speaks about this, that there is a level of darkness, like we saw on the first day, we're used to relating to darkness as like night, like in the first day that God called the darkness night. So here we're talking about a darkness that shines. We're going to develop that idea in a short while. So we begin from the Ein Sof, nothingness. But again, it's not it's a nothing that it's ultimately full of everything that will ever come into being. From that comes the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light. Now, the infinite light is coming from a previous state of darkness. And that's why in the Torah, darkness is mentioned before light, because there is a reality of darkness that comes before light. And so the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light of God, is in a sense, is like the first manifestation of God extending himself beyond his infinite hidden being. But at this point, the Or Ein Sof, there is no world yet. We're before time and space here. There's no world. This is all in the infinite reality that is only godliness, without any concept of time or space or any other creation. And then we have a third stage, and this is the stage of Simsum. We've discussed this many times. This is the contraction, because now that God is ready to create, then there's the existential problem. Where is God going to put a finite world? If everything is infinite and everything is godly and everything is beyond time and beyond space, where does finite reality fit? So the Arizal explained that God was contracted his infinite being and created a vacuum. This vacuum is the darkness. This is the second level of darkness. First, we have darkness, Ein Sof, then we have Or Ein Sof, and now we have the Simsum, we have the vacuum. It's empty. And that emptiness is represented by darkness. And then we have the fourth level, where God shone a single ray of light into the middle of the vacuum. And from that ray of light comes all of the created worlds, including all the spiritual worlds. Everything comes from this ray of light. So just to review, we have darkness, light, okay, Ein Sof, darkness, Or Ein Sof, light. Then we have the contraction. All of this is before creation. And then the fourth level is the light that comes into call it the darkness, from which all worlds come. So that is a very important understanding of the relationship of darkness and light. Now, I want to bring a concept that we've had before in many different contexts. I'll review it quickly, called one becomes two in order to become one. God is one. There's nothing other than God. But then God creates a world. And it begins with the Bet of Breshit, which means two. Bet equals two. That represents there's now duality. There's now plurality. So one has become two. But the whole purpose of creation is that all creation will come to acknowledge and integrate and understand that ultimately it is all one. And as we mentioned, science also, the unified field theory that Einstein sought out, but all of science bought into, the idea that all of the forces of nature ultimately are connected and are one. And now it's called the search of the theory of everything. That's how it's referred to now. So then we learn also that the creation of human beings follow one becomes two in order to become one. Adam is created male and female in one entity. Then they're separated, they become two in order to become one again. But now I'm bringing a new understanding from the first day of creation, because it says in the beginning, light and darkness were intermingled. That's why it says, as soon as God created light, it says, and God separated the light from the darkness, which implies that they were intermingled, they were one. There was no separation between light and darkness. And that's what we talked about. We're talking about a darkness that shines. And also we could say conversely, there's a type of light that blinds. In other words, you have darkness that shines, and you have light that is so strong it actually blinds, and you have to close your eyes. Everything becomes dark because it's too much. So this is part of the paradox of light that we're talking about. So we see that at first light and darkness were together, then God separates light and darkness. But at the end of the first day, it says, Vayhi Erev, Vayhi Voker. There was night and there was day, Yom Echad. They ultimately they are one. Darkness and light, even though our experience in the world and the way we look at things is we separate light and darkness. But ultimately, we're told, Vayhi Erev, Vayhi Boker, Yom Echad. Ultimately, they are unified. Okay, so now we could ask, we do know that we have some very negative connotations of darkness. Light represents consciousness, intellect, wisdom. Darkness represents the opposite, the lack of wisdom, the what was called the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages was this idea that there was just a lot of superstition. There wasn't a lot of wisdom going on, put it that way. Darkness also represents exile, where light represents redemption. Light represents revelation. Darkness represents the lack of revelation. And light represents joy. And darkness represents depression. So I want to speak about this for a few minutes because there's a very, very deep connection here in the ninth plague. The ninth plague in Egypt was called the plague of darkness. Now I want to point out that the last three plagues all had to do with darkness. The eighth plague was the locusts. And the Torah says the locusts were so thick that they blotted out the sun. They blotted out the sun. And it was as if it was dark in the middle of the day because the sun was completely blocked. There were so many of them. The ninth plague already is darkness for 3 days. And then the last plague happens at midnight in the darkness, in the height of the darkness, the last plague. So the last three plagues are all of darkness, but look what happens. From that comes redemption. So here we have this, the light is hidden, but then it's revealed. And we have this theme constantly. We already mentioned last week that this light of the first day was hidden away. It wasn't the physical light as we know it now. It was, we'll call it the predecessor of the physical light that we have now. It was a spiritual light, and that was hidden. So in the description of the plague of darkness, so it says that the darkness was so thick that a person, Rashi brings the Midrash, if a person was standing up, he could not sit down. And if a person was sitting down, he could not stand up. And it also says that a person could not see their neighbor. No one could see anyone else. The darkness was so thick. So it's brought in different Sfarim that on a psychological level, darkness represents depression. And the description in the Torah is actually very accurate. Excuse me. The two descriptions that if a person was sitting down, they couldn't get up, and a person could not see their neighbor. So we know depression. Let's say we'll talk about extreme depression, but it's the same with mild depression. But extreme depression, it's a known fact that people can't move. Especially in the morning, it's just, I can't face life. I can't get out of bed. I don't want to get out of bed. I don't see the point of getting out of bed, but it becomes physical. It's not just the mental state actually affects the entire body. And someone who is depressed usually is practically moving in slow motion. They can't move. They're like frozen. And then we have this idea that you can't see anyone else. Because if one is lost in their depression, that's all they see. Nothing else touches them, nothing else matters, nothing else. It's hard to relate to anything or anyone because we're engulfed in darkness. It's thick, as the Torah said. So this is a very, deep understanding psychologically of darkness. But as we said, the connotations that we put on darkness, the negative side of darkness, is real. It's depression, exile, it's lack of wisdom. It's not being able to relate to anyone or anything. And light, of course, is the opposite. Like we say in Havdalah, La Yehudim Haita Ora v'Simcha v'Sasan v'Ikar, that to the Jews was light and two types of joy and preciousness. So light is connected to joy, and it's connected to the intellect. We're going to be devoting a lot more time developing that idea. Tonight, though, we're going to stick with the light and darkness theme. So now, there is an amazing few verses from the Psalms. If anyone wants to write this down, it's Psalm 139, the 8th to the 12th verse. So it's Kuf Lamed Tet, the 139th Psalm. And it begins in the 8th verse, and it reads like this. This is from David HaMelech. If I ascend unto heaven, there you are. If I make my bed in hell, behold, there you are. If I say, surely only darkness will cover me, and the light be night about me, even the darkness is not dark for you, but the night shines like the day. The darkness and the light are both alike to you. So this, in just a few verses 8 through 12 in the 139th Psalm. This really captures everything that we've said up to this point. I'm going to read it again because it's just such a deep understanding of reality and our place vis-a-vis the Creator and the existential psychological reality that we all face. I'm going to read it again. If I ascend into heaven, there you are. If I make my bed in hell, behold, there you are. So we can translate it in saying, God, if I am with the light, there you are. And if I'm dwelling in darkness, there you are also. The darkness is you also. If I say, surely only darkness will cover me, and the light be night about me. So this is in a sense a description of depression, where David is saying, even the light to me is like night. I'm surrounded by darkness. But then he says, even the darkness is not dark for you. You know, that's David's awareness that even when we're in a dark state, there is godliness there. There's a purpose to it. There's a tikkun that can be made. And then he says, but the night shines, even the darkness is not dark for you, but the night shines like the day. The darkness and the light are both alike to you. So as I said, everything that we've said up to now and the rest of the class is all captured in these few amazing verses. Okay, so now I want to bring another very, very important example of the in a sense, the union of darkness and light. And that's at the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. It's a whole long Torah explaining how the giving of the Torah is, in a sense, a reenactment of creation. Just very, very quickly, the 10 Commandments correspond to the 10 statements through which God created the world. The first one being, Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or, and God said, let there be light. So the 10 Commandments correspond to the 10 statements of creation, also corresponding, of course, to the 10 Sfirot. But the hint here is in a Rashi, and it's on the 6th day of creation, where it says, Vayhi Erev Vayivoker Yom HaShishi. Yom HaShishi. It was evening and it was day, the 6th day, with a hey, which meaning the, like with a capital T. And we know from the other days, it's the 2nd day, the 3rd day, the 4th day, the 5th day. It doesn't say the 6th day. It's Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi, Yom Revi. It doesn't say Yom HaShlishi, Yom HaRevi. So Rashi explains, so why does it here say HaShishi, the 6th day? So Rashi says it's to alert us to another 6th day. Which day is that? The 6th of Sivan. That's the day that the Torah was given. And Rashi continues and says that until the Torah was given at Sinai, the whole world was al tanai, was on condition that the Jewish people would receive the Torah at Sinai. And the Midrash continues, and God says to Israel, if you receive the Torah today, good, and if not, I will return the world to tohu vavohu, to chaos and void. meaning without Torah in the world, there's no purpose for the world. There's no reason for God to have created the world in the first place. So I'm only mentioning this because there's a deep connection between the giving of the Torah and creation. And the last hint that I'll bring is the first verse in the Torah has 7 words and 28 letters. And the name of God that's mentioned is Elohim. The verse that introduces the 10 commandments has exactly 7 words and 28 letters. And the name of God that is mentioned is the same as Elohim. Vayidaber Elohim et kol hadvarim ha'ela lemor. And God said all of these things, saying. But it's the same construct as the first verse of the Torah. Now I'm bringing all of this just to read a description in, here this is from Deuteronomy. This is in Parshat Ve'etchanan, which retells the story of the giving of the 10 commandments and actually goes to the 10 commandments a second time. And there it says like this, and the mountain was burning with fire to the heart of heaven. Darkness, cloud, and thick cloud. So here we see that Torah is called light. Ner mitzvah v'Torah or. The mitzvah is like a candle, and the Torah is like light. In other words, each mitzvah is like a little candle, part of the great, all-encompassing, all-surrounding light of Torah. So Torah is called light, Torah or. In fact, there are many yeshivas called Torah or. Many schools are called Torah or. But here in the description, in the Torah, it mentions that the mountain was surrounded by darkness, cloud, and thick cloud. So here we have, again, in a sense, the intermingling of darkness and light as it was on the first day. So this is just it's a very beautiful idea, connecting creation with the giving of the Torah. Now I want to connect all of this to another idea, and that is the same idea. One becomes two in order to become one. So in Judaism, in Torah, we spend almost all of our time making differentiations, separating between, like in Havdalah, ben kodesh l'chol, between the holy and the profane or the mundane, between pure and impure, between permitted and not permitted. All day long, basically, in life, we're involved from a Torah perspective in making differential, separating what is permitted, what is not permitted. This is permitted now, it's not permitted later. Everything is about separation. Now, the paradoxical idea is that on Motzi Shabbos, when we daven Ma'ariv, this is before we make Havdalah. Before we make Havdalah, in Shul, we daven Ma'ariv, and we say a paragraph that already makes a separation between Shabbos and the weekday. And the important point is that which bracha is it in? It's in the first bracha of the request, which ends Chonein Hadat, God who graces us with knowledge. And so the idea of separating has to do with dat, knowledge. And in the Sfirot, so Dat, we're told that in Dat there are 5 Chasidim and 5 Gevurot. There's 5 kindnesses and 5 judgments. And in the Sfirot, let's say this is Dat, and then under that is Chesed and Gevurah. In other words, Dat is the source of Chesed and Gevurah. And according to Rav Ginzburg, what is the inner essence of Dat? It's yichud, it's unity. So here we have a tremendous paradox about life itself. Is Dat is all about making separations for the good, making differentiations, to knowing when the right time is, the right way to say it, what's permitted, what's pure, what's all the separations that we make. And yet the inner light of Dat is unity. So here's another example of 1 becomes 2 in order to become 1. And this is the relationship between the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. The tree of knowledge is of good and evil. Eitz hadat, tov v'ra. Here we have the separation, the difference between good and evil. But we're told that had they eaten from the Eitz Chaim first, then they could have eaten from the Eitz hadat. It would have been fine. But by eating from the Eitz hadat tov v'ra first, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, it got implanted in our consciousness a dualistic view of reality. Our perspective became bipolar. Instead of having an integrated oneness type of perspective of all of reality. So this goes very, very well with the whole thing of light and dark. Now, one thing we didn't mention, we have to mention, is the classic explanation of, so why is there evil? Why is there darkness? Darkness many times is related to evil. And we're told it comes from the vacuum, that the vacuum became the place where evil, the potential of evil, had its initial creation. So we're told, so why is there evil? Because actually in the morning service, we mentioned already, where we say that God formed light and created evil, and Yotzer Or over Hosha, and then he creates everything. But the original in Isaiah is he forms light and he creates darkness and he makes evil. That's the original. The sages felt that was a little bit too heavy, and they said he creates everything. But we're told that evil has its function. And that function is, in other words, God purposely allows evil. We're told that God, in a sense, no evil comes from God. But God allows evil to exist for the ultimate good of humanity. What is the ultimate good of humanity? That we have free choice. And we're told that this is one of the most important definitions of being created in the image of God, is that we have free choice. We have so much free choice that we could deny God's existence. I mean, like, how far can you go? How far can God go in giving free choice that he even allows someone, if they choose to live a life full of not such good things and not to be so good to other people, and to deny God's existence altogether and be totally immoral and unethical. But we're told that has to exist in order for people to be able to make a choice. Because if it was so forced upon us to do everything that God said, we would never be in God's image. We would always be puppets, because we would have no choice, but it would be so obvious that we have to do what God says. We would never develop, just like parents and children. If parents don't give their children space to grow, or teachers, then you end up with puppets. You end up with people who memorize facts and go through life really not making any real choices whatsoever. It's all nature and nurture, and there's really no free choice there at all. It's only the illusion of free choice. But to be in the image of God means that we have choice, and to have choice, you have to have good and evil. Now, obviously, sometimes we throw up our hands and say, Rabboni Shalom, like, couldn't you have made it a little bit different? Like, maybe you have a different scenario you could pull out of your sleeve. Is this the only way we could come to becoming in the image of God? But we have to have faith that this is the way God created the world. And that hopefully, see, that's what David HaMelech was saying. If I go to heaven, there you are. If I go to the lowest hell, you're there also. You're everywhere. You're everywhere. This has obviously a lot we could discuss. Now I'm going to bring just two more ideas, and then we'll end for tonight. Another paradox, a tremendous paradox, but considering what we've said so far, we can somewhat understand it. This is the idea that we've mentioned a number of times, the idea that the Torah is black fire on white fire. This is from the Zohar, that the Torah is black fire and white fire. The simple understanding, of course, is the black fire are the letters of the Torah, and the white fire is the parchment on which the Torah is written. Now, of course, this is just in a sense, a metaphor for a bigger reality. But the black fire are the letters of the Torah, and the white fire is the parchment. Now, if you really think about it, if we take all of the associations of light and dark, why isn't it white fire on black fire? Why isn't the parchment black and the letters of the Torah, which are light, why aren't they light? It's like really a good question. But here, because of what we've learned tonight, we can understand that this black fire is shining. It's not the absence of light, and it's nothing negative whatsoever. This is this is from the Ein Sof. This is the darkness that is shining. That is shining. So that's just it's something to really think about. Give me one second here. Okay, I was just afraid I wouldn't have enough time, but I realized I have to give over this last piece as a culmination of darkness and light, because next week we're going to be moving on to something else. And that is the word and concept of chashmal. In modern Hebrew, chashmal is electricity. This word only appears in the vision of Ezekiel. In the first chapter of Ezekiel, where he describes his vision, it's called Maaseh Merkavah, and he describes an energy that he calls chashmal. Now, if you look at certain translations, it will be translated as a light, a color. And in fact, I've seen this in, the Crayola boxes of 64. So there's like 8 or 10 different blues. One of them is called electrum. It's this very intense blue. Again, like a darkness that shines. It's like a dark blue that shines. But according to Rav Ginzburg and others, the Chashmal is energy. But people didn't even know how to translate it. So what do the sages say when Ezekiel says he was in contact with this energy called Chashmal? So the sages say it's a type of angel that you'll understand in a second, sometimes is silent and sometimes is speaking. Now, why would the sages say that? Because the word Chashmal, the first syllable, Chash, means to be silent. And the second syllable, Mal, means to speak. That's why in Hebrew, a word is called Milah. Mi yimalel gevurot Hashem. Who will express the strength of God? So the word Chashmal means silent voice. That's what the word literally means. And so the sages say it's a type of angel that is sometimes silent and sometimes speaking. So everyone knows, I assume, I actually had the merit to see Simon and Garfunkel, 1968 in Columbus, Ohio, perform The Sounds of Silence. This is where they get it from. This idea, the sounds of silence, Chashmal. So Rav Ginzburg points out a very important idea. Chash is the first 2 letters of Hosha, of darkness. And Mal, to speak, there are a number of verses in the Tanakh which associate light with speech. Right now, I don't have it in front of me. You'll have to trust me. But there are many verses that associate light with speech. So here in Chashmal, again, we have the darkness and the light. And so Rav Ginzburg explains on the deepest level, what is the Chashmal? The Chashmal is this state from the first day of creation where darkness and light were intermingled together. That's what Ezekiel was able to perceive. That's what was revealed to him, that in this world, there are darkness and light in most cases are opposites. But ultimately, like a triangle, they are united. Now, this comes up with a very, very famous story in the Tanakh of Eliyahu Navi, Elijah the prophet, who is fleeing from the king and queen who want to kill him. And he escapes to the Sinai desert, according to tradition, to Mount Sinai. And he's hiding in a cave. And God comes to him and says, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "I'm escaping from the king and the queen. They're trying to kill me." And then it explains that there are 3 phenomena that happen. That there is like thunder, and Eliyahu thinks that is God. And the text says, but God was not in the thunder. And then there was an earthquake. God was not in the earthquake. There was a tremendous wind. God was not in the wind. And then it says that Eliyahu heard Kol Dmama Daka. He heard, and this is a paradoxical statement, just like Chashmal, speaking silence. He heard a kol, a voice. Remember, we learned about kol. Dmama means silent. He heard and daka means a thin. He heard a thin, silent voice. Now, of course, that's a paradoxical statement, because if it's silent, then there's no voice. And if there's voice, then there's no silence. So this is like the Chashmal. The Chashmal is speaking, is actually silence first. Chashmal, first the silence, and then the speech. And so you'll allow me, I'm going a little bit over tonight, but I'm on a roll here, so you'll forgive me. So in Hebrew, the word for desert is midbar. But if you say the same letters and you just change the vowels, it's middaber, speaking. So this is paradoxical, because if anyone has been to the desert, there is an awesome silence in the desert. The visuals are very like barren, but also audibly, there usually desert, there's wide expanses of space and very little there, very little to make any sounds. So I just want to tell you that this was almost 25 years ago. I was involved with an organization. We ran big Shabbatons. So we took a group of around 125 students here in Israel down to Mitzpeh Ramon. Mitzpeh Ramon is sometimes called the Grand Canyon of Israel. Spectacular place. It's actually the largest natural crater in the world. It's the largest natural crater in the world, is in Mitzpeh Ramon. And on Friday morning, we went hiking. And it was quite hot, and we got to a place of shade and we sat down. And very spontaneously, I had not planned this, I gave over this idea that the desert is a place of awesome silence, but it's somewhat paradoxical, because the word for desert, midbar, also means midaber, speech. And I told the story of Eliyahu, the same story I just told. And I said, let's do an experiment. Again, I did this on one foot. I said, everyone get in position. No one move. No one cough. No one clear your throat. Everyone just sit in silence, and let's try to experience this silence. Now, this is like 125 young people. So everyone sat down, and I had the good fortune, no planes flew by, no birds chirped. We were far away from roads. You could not hear any roads. We were far away from any electric wires, so you couldn't hear buzzing from electric lines. And we sat there for about 3 minutes. It wasn't more than 3 minutes. It was such an awesome experience. It was absolute silence, absolute. Nothing disturbed it. Everyone was astounded by it. It was just, and actually, in the rest of my life, I've only experienced it 1 or 2 other times, because everywhere you go, there's something that you hear. It's very difficult in society today. Even wind blowing through trees makes a sound. Even a leaf falling makes a sound. There's sound everywhere. Anyways, this is the Chashmal, the speaking silence. and the darkness that is light. So that's how we'll end this idea of darkness and light. We will continue for 2 more weeks talking about different aspects of light.